The ground beneath the shovel was hard, frozen, but I kept digging anyway. The December sun shone dimly, barely breaking through the gray clouds over Louisville, and the cold wind chilled my bones. At 73, this kind of work was hard, but sitting around the house doing nothing was even harder. The rose bushes needed to be covered for the winter, and I knew that if I didn't do it today, it might be too late tomorrow. My garden has always been a source of pride. Neighbors would often peek over the fence, admiring the summer riot of colors. The roses I had grown for over 20 years were a delight to the eye every season. The late Mary had adored them, and after her death I had tended them with redoubled diligence, as if each bud that bloomed could bring back some of the warmth she had brought to our home. As I shoveled, I thought about how much had changed over the years. The house seemed too big for one person, but I wasn't going to sell it. My whole life had been here. Brian had grown up here. Mary and I had been happy here. But that happiness had ended too soon, and now I was alone with my memories in a garden that needed constant attention. Every morning I woke up to an empty house, and the first thing I did was go to the window overlooking the garden. It became a ritual, a way to set the mood for the new day. In winter, the view was not particularly cheerful, bare tree branches, wilted flower beds. But I knew that beneath this outward lifelessness was a strength that would burst into the light again in the spring. Perhaps in this I found some parallel to my own life. My hands had become calloused from decades of factory work, my fingers used to heavy tools, iron and oil. Even now, 5 years after retirement, I couldn't sit idle. Gardening replaced my factory work, became a way for me to remain necessary, at least to myself. Each square meter dug, each pruned bush gave the feeling that the day was not wasted. The neighbor's fence creaked, and I looked up. Doris Hamilton, my neighbor of 15 years, was hurrying toward me through the gate. She was a sociable woman, curious, always up on the latest news and gossip. Sometimes it was annoying, but more often I was grateful for her attention. At my age, human companionship becomes especially valuable, especially when one's own family is slow to provide it. "Robert," she shouted from a distance, waving her hands in bright red mittens. "Robert, have you been watching TV today?" I stuck the shovel in the ground and wiped my hands on my old jeans. Doris was approaching at a brisk pace, and I could tell from her flushed face that the news was important. In all the years we'd been neighbors, I'd grown accustomed to the fact that she was always the first to know about all the happenings in the neighborhood. Her husband Harold often laughed at her wife's peculiarity, but I understood that for an old woman whose children had long since left the country, neighborhood news was the only way to feel part of the larger world. "No, I've been working in the garden all day," I answered, moving closer to the fence. "What happened?" "Your Brian was on TV," she blurted out of breath. "Sonam." There was a whole story about him on the evening news. They said he'd won some big case involving a major corporation. The reporter called him one of the most promising lawyers in the city. I nodded, trying not to show that the news didn't surprise me in the least. Brian had indeed been very successful in his career. After university, he'd quickly found a job at a prestigious law firm, then opened his own practice, and things were looking up for him. Money was flowing, clients were lining up, and Brian Griffin's name was appearing in the local press more and more often. "Handsome and personable," Doris continued, clearly enjoying the moment and the opportunity to share her fresh impressions. "And his wife was standing next to him. What's her name?" "Catherine," I prompted. "That's right, Catherine. So elegant, in an expensive coat. It's obvious that people are well-to-do, hair-styled like in a magazine, expensive jewelry, and next to her, Brian in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. It's a picture? Are you proud of your son?" The question hung in the air, and I didn't immediately know what to say. Proud? Of course, any father would be proud of his child's accomplishments. But between pride and the emptiness I felt when I talked or thought about Brian, there was a gulf of misunderstanding and alienation. Was it pride, or was it just a statement of fact that my son had succeeded? "He's accomplished a lot," I said carefully. "He's always been a smart boy." Doris nodded with a knowing look. "I remember how he studied, the grades he brought home. He was always carrying books, so serious. And now he has such a status. He probably drives expensive cars, dines in restaurants, flies abroad on vacation." She was right. Brian lived in a world that was radically different from the one he grew up in. Expensive suits, an executive car, a large house in a prestigious neighborhood. All this was the result of his hard work and talent. And my money, which I saved, denying myself everything to give him a good education. But there was something else about it, something that made me feel like an outsider in his new life. I remembered working double shifts at the factory when Brian was in college. How I counted every dollar, saving for his tuition. How Mary darned my work shirt so she wouldn't have to buy new ones, saving every penny for her son. We were a team then, a family united by a common goal to give Brian a better future. "When was the last time he visited you?" Doris asked, a note of sympathy in her voice. I wondered. Brian's last visit was, when was that? A month ago? 2? He dropped in for half an hour in a hurry for some important meeting. We talked about the weather, about my health. He took a quick look around the house as if assessing its condition, and then went on his way. No questions about my life, no interest in how I spend my days. Just a formal check to see if the old man was still alive. "He came by recently," I lied. "He's very busy, a lot of work." Sure, Doris agreed hastily, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. She wasn't a stupid woman, and she knew exactly what my evasive answer meant. People like that are always busy, but family comes first, doesn't it? After all, money is good, and parents are sacred. I didn't say anything. Family. When Mary was alive, we really were a family. Brian came over every weekend. We had dinner together, discussed his studies, made plans. Mary cooked his favorite meals, asked about every little detail of his life. After his marriage, the visits became less frequent, and after Mary's death, they almost disappeared. It was as if his mother's death had severed the last thread that bound him to his stepfather's house. "What was his wife like?" Doris asked. "I've only seen her from afar a couple of times when they came to visit you." "Catherine is a nice girl," I answered automatically, though the word nice didn't quite fit my sister-in-law's description. Catherine was beautiful, educated, from a well-to-do family. When Brian introduced us to her, I immediately realized that she belonged to a completely different social stratum. In her manner, in her speech, in her clothes, you could feel what comes from being raised in a wealthy family. She was polite to me, but it was formal, as if I were not her husband's father, but some distant relative with whom it was necessary to maintain decorum. "That's fine," Doris said. "The main thing is that she loves and appreciates her son. Some rich men's wives only think about money." "Well, I won't keep you," she added, noticing that I was thinking again. "I just thought you might like to know. It's nice to have your kids make the whole town proud. And then maybe he'll see the news about himself and decide to come over and share his joy with you." She turned and walked toward her house, and I stood by the fence watching her, proud of the whole town. Yeah, I guess Brian was a real source of pride. A boy from a simple working-class family, the son of a locksmith, he had made a dizzying career and was now one of the most influential people in Louisville, the American dream in the flesh. But why did I feel so alone? Why did my son's success not bring me joy, but only emphasize the gulf that had grown between us? Could it have been that Brian, having climbed the social ladder, had become self-conscious about his background? Or was it simply that he didn't have enough time for his old father, who reminded him of a less than presentable past? I returned to the rose bushes and continued my work. The ground gave way reluctantly, but I stubbornly dug further, covering the roots for the winter. There was something soothing about the work, distracting me from the thoughts that had been on my mind more and more lately. Thoughts about my son living his own life, in which there was no place for the old father. That all the sacrifices I had made, all the money I had spent on his education, all the hopes I had placed in him, had resulted in my now being something of an inconvenient relic of the past for him. I remember how proud I was when Brian got into law school, how excited he was about his first successes, his first victories in college debates, how Mary and I dreamed of what the future held for him. At the time, I felt like I was investing not only in my son's education, but in our relationship with him. That success would make him happier and therefore our family stronger. But that's not how life worked out. The more successful Brian became, the more he drifted away from his roots. At first it was in small things. He stopped talking about his business, he called less often, his visits became shorter. Then there were new friends, new interests, a new social circle, and finally, Catherine, who finally lured him into a world where the native of a working family had no place. The sun was setting, coloring the sky a dull orange. I finished my work in the garden and headed toward the house. The old wooden structure was in need of repair. The paint was peeling, some of the boards were loose, and the porch was sagging. But I had neither the means nor the desire to do it. Why? For whom? Brian was unlikely to ever live here, and I had no other heirs. Entering the house, I turned on the lights and put the kettle on. The evening news was due in half an hour, and I was curious to see the story about Brian that had Doris so excited. Maybe I would see my son as others saw him, a successful, confident man who had achieved everything through his own hard work. Or maybe I would finally understand why there was no place for me in that success. Sitting in my old armchair with a cup of tea, I stared at the TV screen where they were showing a story about Brian. The camera caught his confident gestures as he answered a reporter's questions outside the courthouse. Catherine was standing next to him, wearing an elegant dark blue coat that I was sure cost more than my monthly pension. They looked like the perfect couple from a glossy magazine, beautiful, successful, wealthy. Looking at them, I couldn't help but think back to the day I'd first met Catherine's family. It was almost 6 years ago, at the engagement party. Brian had brought me to the country club where the Blackwells were having their reception. Even then, I realized I was in a completely foreign world. The Oakland Hills Country Club was a 20-minute drive from downtown Louisville, but it felt like another planet. The neatly trimmed lawns stretched to the horizon, with beds of exotic flowers scattered among them. The club's main building was a colonial-style mansion with snow-white columns and wide terraces. The parking lot was lined with cars, each worth more than my annual income. I drove up in my old Ford, which looked like a stray mongrel in the midst of this automobile splendor. The valet, a young guy in a spotless uniform, accepted the keys as if he were doing me a favor. Brian nervously adjusted my tie, the only decent one I had, and led the way to the entrance. "Dad, remember Philip Blackwell owns a chain of car dealerships, and Judith does charity work," he whispered in my ear as we walked up the marble steps. "They're very powerful people in the city. Try to make a good impression." I nodded, though his words hurt me a little, as if I didn't know how to behave in society. Yes, I was a simple laborer, but that didn't mean I had no manners or sense of dignity. It was just that my world was different, where people judged each other not by the thickness of their wallets, but by honesty and hard work. Inside the club, there was an atmosphere of restrained luxury. High ceilings with moldings, parquet floors covered with expensive carpets, antique furniture. Everything spoke of money, big money that had been saved up for generations. About 40 guests were already gathered in the large hall, and at a glance it was clear that they all belonged to the high society of Louisville. The men were dressed in impeccable suits from expensive tailors, the women in dresses of famous designers, and their jewelry sparkled even in the dim light of chandeliers. Conversations were about country houses, European travel, investments, and charity auctions. I felt like an actor who had been mistakenly invited to play a part for which he had neither costume nor text. Philip Blackwell appeared to be a man of about 55, tall and personable. His gray hair was neatly slicked back, and his tanned face suggested that he spent a lot of time on the tennis courts or the yacht. His handshake was firm but cold, and his gaze was assessing. He looked at me the way one looks at merchandise, estimating its value and quality. "So you're Brian's father," he said, a faint surprise in his voice. "Catherine had told me a lot about you." I doubted that Catherine had told me anything about me at all, but I smiled politely. "It's very nice to meet you, Mr. Blackwell. You have a beautiful daughter." "Yes, Catherine is our pride," Philip replied, and his face softened. "She graduated from Harvard with honors, speaks 4 languages fluently, and is an artist. We are very happy that she chose such a talented young man like your son." There was nothing offensive in his words, but something in his tone made it clear. They were glad that Catherine had chosen Brian, not the other way around. It was as if it was a condescending favor on their part to accept a capable, but not very fortunate young lawyer into the family. Judith Blackwell appeared beside her husband like a queen, honoring a mere subject with an audience. A woman in her 50s, she had retained her beauty and elegance through expensive beauticians, personal trainers, and stylists. Her dress was a work of art, and her pearl necklace was probably worth more than my house. Mr. Griffin! She held out her hand, and I wasn't sure if I should shake it or kiss it. What a pleasure to finally meet you. Brian is such a wonderful young man. We are just thrilled with him. She spoke as if Brian were an exotic find, a curious specimen they had decided to nurture. There was a patronizing warmth in her voice, like a rich lady taking a puppy from a shelter. Brian told me you worked in a factory, Judith continued. How interesting. Must have been hard work, huh? Work is work, I replied. Honest, necessary work. Of course, she agreed hastily. Workers are the backbone of our society. We value simple, working people very much. She pronounced the word simple with a special intonation, as if she were talking about a rare species of animal to be protected. I realized that in their world I was just such an exhibit, a representative of the working class who by some miracle had produced a talented son. All evening I felt like an object of polite curiosity. The Blackwells' guests came up, made acquaintances, and asked routine questions about my work and life. Their interest was genuine, but superficial, like tourists exploring the local sites. They wanted to hear a couple of anecdotes from the life of an ordinary worker so that they could tell about it at their parties. Did you know that your son graduated from university with a red diploma? An old lady in diamonds asked me. You had to rise so high from your circumstances to such success. She hesitated, searching for the right words so as not to offend me by mentioning my poverty. But the offense had already seeped through her politeness. To all of them, Brian's story was a beautiful tale of how a talented boy from the bottom had risen to their level. And in that tale, I played the role of the obstacle he heroically overcame. The thing that struck me the most about Brian was the way he acted. It was as if he tried to keep his distance from me, introducing me to the guests quickly and without detail, and then immediately turning the conversation to other topics. When one of the guests spoke to me, Brian glanced nervously in our direction, ready to intervene at any moment if the conversation took an unwelcome turn. I understood his concern. In this world, looks and background meant a lot, and I, in my only decent suit, with calloused hands and plain speech, was a living reminder of where Brian had come from. He wanted to fit into his new environment, to become his own among these people, and my presence was hindering that process. Catherine was a model of manners that night. She introduced me to everyone as Brian's dad in a tone that left no doubt that she understood the difference between us. A few times she came up to ask if I was doing well, if I needed anything, but her concern was duty rather than genuine sympathy. Mr. Griffin, do you see Brian often? She asked me at one point when we were alone at the window. We try to see each other regularly, I answered, though even then our meetings were becoming less frequent. That's wonderful, Catherine said, but that wasn't what I saw in her eyes. She was already planning a future in which her old father's influence on her husband would be minimized. By the end of the evening, I was tired of the constant tension, of having to follow every word, of feeling like I was in a museum where I was both a visitor and an exhibit. When Brian finally drove me home, we were silent the whole way. He stopped the car in front of my house but kept the engine running. Thanks for coming, Dad, he said. It meant a lot to Catherine. Not to him, I noted to myself, but to Catherine. Good people, I replied diplomatically. Yes, they are very influential. Philip can help me in my career. He has connections in all the business circles of the city. I nodded and got out of the car. Brian left without going inside, though he would have stayed for tea with Mary earlier. That night I realized I was losing my son. Not physically. He was alive, healthy, successful. But spiritually he belonged to another world where there was no place for me. Now, years later, looking at the TV screen where Brian was being interviewed next to his wife, I remembered that evening with a special bitterness. The Blackwells had achieved their goal. They had completely absorbed my son, made him part of their circle, and I remained what I was then, an uncomfortable reminder of a past better forgotten. The TV program ended, and I turned off the sound. The house fell into silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. That clock was inherited from my father, like the house, like the understanding that honesty and hard work are the most important values in life. But my son chose other values, another life. And in this choice, there was no place for me. The morning of December 23rd was frosty and clear. I woke up early as usual before dawn, and the first thing I did was to go to the window. It had snowed overnight, and my garden had turned into a snow-white fairy tale. The rose bushes I had covered with snow looked like small snowdrifts, and the bare branches of the apple trees were adorned with elegant snowcaps. Christmas was always a special time in our home. Mary loved the holiday and began preparing for it as early as November. She would bake cookies, decorate the house with lights, and buy gifts. Even when money was tight, she managed to create a holiday atmosphere out of nothing. I remember when Brian was a little boy helping her hang toys on the tree, and I would bring wood for the fireplace, and the whole house would be filled with the smell of pine and cinnamon. Now Christmas was just another day on the calendar for me. I didn't buy a tree, I didn't decorate the house, I didn't bake cookies. Why would I? There was no one to enjoy the beauty. Brian spent the holidays with Catherine's family, and I was alone with memories of the time when we were a real family. After eating breakfast oatmeal and drinking coffee, I dressed warmer and went out to shovel the driveway of snow. It wasn't easy work for my age, but what could I do? The utilities in our neighborhood didn't work well, and I didn't want to ask my neighbors for help. Besides, physical work helped me not to think about how lonely I would be spending the approaching holidays. The snow was wet and heavy, and after half an hour of work, I was already tired. I stopped for a break, leaning on my shovel, and saw the mailman walking down the street. Fred Miller had been working on this lot for about 20 years, and we knew him well. He usually came around lunchtime, but today he was early, probably in a hurry to finish his work before the holidays. "Good morning, Robert," he shouted as he approached my fence. "You've been working since morning? At your age, you should save your back." "What can I do?" I shrugged. "The path won't clear itself." Fred shook his head sympathetically. He had 3 grown sons who regularly helped their elderly parents with household chores. He'd hinted on more than one occasion that he didn't understand why Brian was so seldom at his father's house. "There's something for you," Fred said, pulling an envelope out of his bag. "It came last night, but I'd already finished work. Thought I'd drop it off in the morning." The envelope was plain, white, with the address printed on it. In the upper left corner was the seal of a prestigious Louisville law firm, not the one where Brian worked, but some other one. Strange, I thought. Who would want to send me business correspondence? Maybe it had something to do with a pension or insurance? "Thank you, Fred," I said, accepting the letter. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas to you too, Robert. Don't work too hard, get some rest." Fred went on his way, and I stood there with the envelope in my hand. Something about it was unusual. Not that it was disturbing, but strange. Usually I got all my business mail from government agencies or insurance companies, but this was a private firm. Besides, the envelope seemed too light for serious documents. When I entered the house, I sat down at the kitchen table and carefully opened the envelope with the letter opener I had inherited from my father. Inside was an ordinary movie theater ticket and a small note written in familiar handwriting. "Dad, Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoy the movie. Catherine and I went to her parents' house in Miami for the holidays. We'll be back after the new year. Brian." I reread those lines several times, not believing my eyes. A ticket to the movie theater for a screening on December 24th, Christmas Eve. The movie was called A Christmas Story, one of those sentimental movies they show every year before the holidays. The ticket price was $10. $10. My son, who made more in an hour than I made in a week in retirement, sent me a $10 ticket as a Christmas present. Didn't even bother to buy it in person, but ordered delivery through a law firm so he wouldn't waste time traveling to my place. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a wave of bitterness rising inside. Of course, it wasn't about the money. If Brian had brought me a bouquet of wildflowers picked with his own hands, I would have been happy. It was the fact that this gift spoke eloquently of how little I mattered in his life. A formality, a tribute to propriety, a way to buy my father off without spending any time or mental energy. Christmas used to be a real holiday for us. I remember little Brian carefully choosing presents for his parents, spending his meager pocket money. He gave me homemade cards, small crafts made at school and labor class. I still have those gifts to this day, in a box on my bedroom dresser. They were priceless back then, because they contained love. Now my successful, wealthy son, who could afford to buy me anything, chose the cheapest and most impersonal way to celebrate the holiday. He didn't even send a birthday card, just a two-line note written hastily between important errands. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. The neighbors were already starting to get ready for the holiday, decorating their houses with colored lights, putting up glowing reindeer and Santa Clauses in their yards. Doris had a large Christmas tree on her porch, decorated with red and gold balls. You could see that their children and grandchildren were coming to visit, and the house would be full of laughter and joy. And I would spend Christmas alone, with a movie theater ticket as my only reminder that I had a son. Taking the note, I reread it again. Catherine and I went to her parents' house in Miami. Sure, off to the Blackwells. There, a luxurious villa by the ocean, expensive gifts, exquisite dinners, and the company of powerful and wealthy people awaits them. Why waste precious vacation time with an old father when you can enjoy the Florida sunshine and plan new business connections? I imagine them spending time in Miami. Philip must have thrown a huge Christmas party, inviting all his rich friends. Brian and Catherine are accepting congratulations, receiving expensive gifts, making plans for the future. And they only think of me when one of the guests asks about relatives. Oh yes, Brian has a father, a simple laborer, lives in an old house, we rarely see him. But we sent him a small gift, of course. The bitterness was growing stronger. I realized that Brian had the right to spend the holidays however he wanted, with whomever he wanted. He's a grown man, he has his own family, his own interests. But couldn't I have at least called? Stop by for half an hour before you left? Invite me to spend one evening with them? No, of course not. I wouldn't have fit in with them. My simple suit would look ridiculous among the expensive outfits. My stories about working at the plant would seem boring to people who were used to discussing business and investments. I'd be a black sheep, a source of embarrassment to my son and his wife. Better to send the old man to the movie theater. Let him spend time with other lonely people who have nowhere else to go at Christmas. The ticket lay on the table, reminding him of its existence. A Christmas Story, Christmas Eve, 8 o'clock at night. The auditorium would probably be half empty. Who goes to the movies on a day like that? Only people who have nowhere else to go. I tried to remember the last time I'd been to a movie theater. I think it had been about 3 years ago, when Doris had talked me into keeping her company at some romantic movie. I'd been uncomfortable sitting in a darkened theater with couples holding hands and whispering. Now the prospect of spending the evening in the company of strangers seemed even more depressing. But what else could I do? Sit at home, remembering Christmases past, when the house was full of warmth and laughter? Watch television showing happy families gathered around the holiday table? Listening to neighbors having fun with their children and grandchildren? I put the note and ticket back in the envelope. Tomorrow, Christmas Eve, I'm going to the movie theater. Not because I want to see the movie, but because it's the only connection left between my son and me. It may be formal, it may be cold, but it's still a connection. Maybe the movie will be good. Maybe it will be a story about people finding each other despite all the obstacles. About how love overcomes alienation and a family becomes a family again. Or maybe it will be another sentimental fairy tale that will only emphasize the contrast between on-screen happiness and real life. Either way, I'm going, because it's a gift from my son, however humble, and because I have no other choice. I spent the rest of the day doing my usual chores, trying not to think about the approaching holiday. I shoveled snow from the driveway, made a simple lunch, watched the news. In the evening, Doris called and invited me to come over for Christmas dinner, but I politely declined. I didn't want to be an object of pity, a lonely old man whom the neighbors had sheltered out of charity. Going to bed, I took another look at the ticket. At this time tomorrow, I would be sitting in a darkened theater room, alone among strangers, watching a movie about Christmas. And my son will be enjoying the warmth of Florida in the company of his new family. Such is my Christmas present. On January 3rd, as I was cleaning up the neighbor's Christmas tree ornaments that the wind had scattered around my yard, a familiar silver Mercedes pulled up at the gate. Brian had returned from his trip. I watched him sit in the car for a few minutes, talking on the phone, gesturing with his free hand. Even after his vacation, he couldn't tear himself away from his work. Finally, he got out of the car, adjusted his expensive cashmere scarf, and headed toward me. His Miami tan made his face look healthier, and his new suit emphasized his success. But his movements were hurried. He didn't plan to stay long. "Hi, Dad," he said, giving me a brief, formal hug. "Happy New Year. How are you? How did you spend the holidays?" "Fine, relax," I replied. "Thanks for the movie ticket. The movie was good." That was a lie. I never went to the movie theater on Christmas Eve. I sat at home, watching TV and thinking about how we used to celebrate Christmas as a family. The ticket was still sitting on the kitchen table. I didn't dare throw it away, but it hurt to look at it. "Great," Brian nodded absent-mindedly, already pulling out his phone to check his messages. "I can't take long. I have a meeting with a client in an hour. Just stop by to see how things were going, if everything was okay with the house." We walked into the living room and Brian looked around the interior. His eyes stopped at the peeling wallpaper, the cracked ceiling, the old furniture. I could see him mentally calculating the cost of repairs, wondering how much it would all cost and if it was even worth investing in this house. "Is the heating working okay?" he asked. "The pipes aren't freezing?" "It's fine. The house is warm, no problems." "That's good. I was thinking maybe we should call a handyman to check the system. At your age, a cold can be dangerous." There was practical concern in his words, but no warmth. He was concerned about the house as his future property and me as a temporary tenant to be maintained. "How was your trip to Miami?" I asked, sitting down in my chair. Brian's face perked up immediately. He put the phone away and looked at me with genuine interest for the first time during the visit. "Oh, that was amazing," and he said. "Philip had rented us a villa right on the ocean. Imagine, your own beach, pool, staff. We had breakfast every morning on the terrace overlooking the sea." He spoke with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. His eyes were shining, his voice warmer. I could see that the trip had really made a great impression on him. "Catherine was thrilled," he continued. "Every day new entertainment, yacht, tennis, restaurants, and the sunsets. We took pictures every night. Philip knows people like that. We met a federal court judge, a senator from Florida, very useful connections." I listened and realized that for Brian, this trip was not just a vacation, but an important step in his career. Every new acquaintance, every meeting was viewed through the lens of possible benefits. Even the vacation had become part of a strategy for life success. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "Must be expensive." "Come on, Dad," Brian said, waving his hand. "Philip paid for everything. He considers Catherine and me family. Treats us like his own children. He says he's investing in our future." The word family hurt my ears. So Philip Blackwell considers Brian family, but his own father isn't. Or he is, but on some other, less significant level. "And most importantly," Brian leaned toward me, lowering his voice as if he were about to share a state secret. "Philip gave Judith an amazing Christmas present, a villa in Sarasota. He said it with such awe, as if he were talking about the crown jewels. Can you believe it? A real villa by the sea. 3 stories, 7 bedrooms, private marina. It's worth over $2 million. When he handed her the keys on Christmas morning, Judith cried tears of happiness. I sat in silence, digesting what I'd heard. $2 million, a villa by the sea, and me, a $10 movie theater ticket. The contrast was so stark that I wanted to laugh or cry. "Philip said it was a gift not only for Judith, but for the whole family," Brian went on, not noticing my state of mind. "Catherine and I are going to spend our vacations there. It's a great opportunity. We'll be able to invite important clients there, organize business meetings in an informal atmosphere." "And what did you give your father-in-law and mother-in-law?" I asked, although I already guessed the answer. "Well, I couldn't compete with Philip on the scale," Brian said, embarrassed. "But I tried too. I gave Judith a diamond necklace and Philip a Rolex watch. Catherine helped me choose. She knows their tastes better than I do." "Expensive gifts," I said. "Of course they are. But it's worth investing in relationships with people like that. Philip has already promised to introduce me to some big businessmen, and Judith wants to invite Catherine to be on the board of her charitable foundation. It's very prestigious." Everything in his story revolved around money, prestige, useful connections. Not a word about the time they spent as a family, that they just had a good time together. Just calculation and profit. "And how was Catherine herself?" I asked. "Did she enjoy it?" Of course she did. She was at home. Philip and Judith are very fond of her. They say she's the perfect daughter. Beautiful, intelligent, well-mannered. Judith even said that if they had a daughter, they'd want her to be like Catherine. I involuntarily compared the Blackwells' attitude toward Catherine to their attitude toward me. A perfect daughter and an inconvenient relative. One worthy of $1 million gift, the other worthy of a movie theater ticket. You know, Dad, Brian said, looking at his watch, I really have to go. But I wanted to tell you, we'll probably go to the Blackwells more often this year. They have so many interesting things going on, so many opportunities. Philip says he wants to help me open an office in Miami. Can you imagine? A branch of my firm in Florida. He said it with such pride, as if he already saw himself as the owner of a legal empire stretching from Kentucky to Florida. That means I'll be traveling there more often on business. Catherine wants to spend more time with her parents too, especially now that they have a villa in Sarasota, so we'll probably see each other less often. He said the last words casually, as if it were a change of stationery supplier, not a severing of the already tenuous ties with her father. I see, I said, but we'll keep in touch, of course, and you can always call if anything happens. I mean, if there's a serious problem with the house or your health, serious problems. Not wanting to talk, not needing to talk, but serious problems. I'd become a kind of emergency service to him, only to be called in case of emergency. Brian, I said quietly, do you remember what you gave me for Christmas? He was confused for a moment, trying to remember, I guess. Of course I remember, a movie ticket. I thought you might enjoy seeing a good movie. You used to love movies. $10, I said. What? The ticket was $10. Brian frowned, not sure what I was getting at. So what? It's not about the money. It's the attention, the caring. I thought of you. I picked the right movie. And you gave your father-in-law a watch for how much? And Dad, what does that have to do with? These are completely different situations. Philip is a powerful man. He's helping me with my career. It's a business relationship, you know? You and I are a family. We don't need expensive gifts to show our love. Family. He said the word again, but it sounded empty, formal. So a $10 ticket is enough for a family, but business partners need Rolexes and diamonds. I understand, I said. Good. Then I really have to go. I'll see you next week, okay? But we both knew there wouldn't be a meeting next week, or the week after that either. Brian was already living in a different world, where his old father was an annoying nuisance, a reminder of a not-so-prestigious past. He gave me a quick goodbye hug and walked out of the house. I walked him to the gate, watching him get into his car, pull out his phone again, and start talking before even starting the engine. Probably already discussing business plans, new opportunities that the Blackwells' acquaintance would open up. Back in the house, I sit down at the kitchen table, where the movie theater ticket still lay. $10 versus $2 million. Such was the difference in how my son valued relationships with different people. But it wasn't just about money, it was about attitude. The way Brian talked about the gift to the Blackwells and the way he mentioned my ticket. Delight versus indifference, pride versus formality. I realized that to him I was no longer a father to him, but a burden. Someone to maintain a minimum of decorum with, but nothing more. Someone he'd like to get rid of, but couldn't on moral grounds. Maybe Brian even thought of himself as a good son. After all, he hadn't abandoned me at all. He visited me occasionally, sent me a Christmas present. By his standards, that was enough to keep a family together. But it wasn't enough for me. I'd worked my whole life to give my son a better future, saving every dime, giving up every pleasure, working double shifts. All for what? To end up an inconvenient reminder of the past? Mary always said that children don't have to be grateful to their parents, that we don't raise them for themselves, we raise them for life. But she meant gratitude, not basic respect. She didn't demand honors, she just wanted to remain a part of her son's life. Now I sat alone in an empty house and realized that I no longer wanted to be the object of condescending pity. I don't want to receive handouts in the form of cheap movie tickets while my son showered strangers with expensive gifts. I don't want to listen to stories about how great his life is with the new family that replaced his birth family. At that moment, sitting at the kitchen table with a ticket in my hands, I made a decision. I hadn't finalized it for myself yet, but something had drastically changed in my attitude toward the situation. If Brian thinks $10 is enough to express filial love, then let him find out how much paternal affection really costs. If he thinks he can treat me like an inconvenient relative who needs to be visited from time to time out of a sense of obligation, then let him realize that there is a limit to patience. If he cares more about impressing the Blackwells than maintaining a relationship with his own father, then let him live with that choice and its consequences. I got up from the table and walked over to the old secretary in the living room where important documents were kept. Mary's will, certificates of ownership for the house and lot, bank records. All things Brian hadn't even realized were there. It was time to remind him that there were things in life more valuable than money and useful connections, and that sometimes the cost of mistakes is much higher than you might think. On the morning of January 7th, I woke up with a clear head and a firm decision. The night was restless. I got up many times, walked around the house, went through the documents in the secretary, thought over every detail of the upcoming actions. By morning, all doubts had subsided, and I knew exactly what I had to do. The first thing I had to do was to find a suitable lawyer. I couldn't go to Brian's firm. It would create a conflict of interest and embarrass my son. Plus, I needed someone who wouldn't talk me out of my decision out of a false sense of family solidarity. I remembered a name that had been mentioned more than once in the local news: Harrison Clark, an experienced attorney specializing in estate litigation and probate law. His firm was considered one of the best in Louisville, and Clark himself had a reputation as a tough but honest professional. More importantly, he was Brian's main competitor for big clients. Calling his office, I made an appointment for the same day. The receptionist warned me that the consultation would cost $300 for an hour, but that didn't matter to me. I had the money, more than Brian suspected. Harrison Clark's office was located in the heart of the business district, in a modern glass and steel building. I walked up to the 23rd floor and found myself in a spacious lobby decorated with expensive wood and marble. At the front desk sat a young woman who greeted me with a professional smile. "Mr. Griffin, Mr. Clark is waiting for you in his office. Please come in." The lawyer's office was impressive. Huge windows overlooked the city. The walls were hung with diplomas and awards, and a massive oak desk spoke of the seriousness of its owner's intentions. Behind the desk sat a man of about 55, gray-haired, with shrewd gray eyes and a firm handshake. "Have a seat, Mr. Griffin," Clark said, pointing to the chair across the desk. "My secretary said you need help with some property issues. Why don't you tell me what it's all about?" I pulled out the file folder I'd brought with me and placed it on the desk. "I need to redo a will and some property deeds. It's a little delicate." Clark opened the folder and began to scrutinize the documents. I saw his eyebrows creep up in surprise when he saw the amount of real estate I owned. Most people, including Brian, thought I only owned an old house and some small savings. The reality was quite different. "Quite an impressive fortune," Clark finally said. "A house in a historic neighborhood, a plot of land outside the city, shares in several companies. May I ask how you acquired all this?" "The deceased wife was the sole heir of her parents," I explained. "Her father owned a small construction business, knew how to invest. When Mary died 5 years ago, everything passed to me in the will." "And does your son know about this?" "No. We've never discussed financial matters in detail. He thinks I live on one pension." Clark nodded, making notes in his notebook. "I see. And what exactly do you want to change?" I took a deep breath. Saying the next words wasn't easy, but it was necessary. "Sakatu. I want my son out of the will. Completely. The entire estate should go to a charitable organization." Clark looked up from the documents and looked at me carefully. "This is a big decision, Mr. Griffin. May I ask why?" "You may. My son believes that a $10 movie theater ticket as a Christmas present is enough to maintain a relationship with me. Yet he gives his father-in-law a Rolex watch, and his mother-in-law gets a $2 million villa." I told Clark the whole story. Brian's gradual estrangement, his new family, his trip to Miami, and how he prioritizes his relationships. The lawyer listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "I understand your pain," he said when I was done, "but disinheritance is a last resort. Perhaps you should talk to your son openly first. Explain your feelings. For 30 years, I've tried to be a good father, I answered. Poured everything I had into his education, supported his choices, took pride in his success, and now I'm a burden to him, an inconvenient reminder of the past. Talking about it isn't going to help. Clark looked at the documents again. Okay. Legally, your right to dispose of the property as you see fit is unquestionable. The only thing I need to clarify is, has your son pressured you? Did he threaten or coerce you? On the contrary, he doesn't even know I own the property. Then everything's fine. What charitable organization do you want to make an heir to? I've been thinking. To be honest, I didn't have a specific organization in mind. The main thing was to disinherit Brian, to show him the price of his indifference. What's your advice? It's important to me that the money goes to a really good cause. There are a few good options. Clark pulled some brochures from his desk. An orphanage in our neighborhood is in need of renovation. A senior center that cares for those abandoned by their own children. A homeless shelter. Choose what's closest to your heart. A senior center. That sounded symbolic. Let my money help those who, like me, have been betrayed by their own children. Senior center, I said. Good choice. Now for the timing. I can have a new will ready by the end of the week. I'll also need to notarize a few documents and make changes to the bank accounts. The whole process will take about 2 weeks. That's great. What about confidentiality? Absolutely. Your son won't know about the changes until, when the will goes into effect. Clark was too sensitive to talk directly about my death, but we both knew what we were talking about. There's one more question, I said. My son is also a lawyer, Brian Griffin of Griffin and Associates. Do you know him? Clark's face became more serious. Of course I do. We've been on opposite sides of the courtroom many times. He's a good lawyer, I'll give him that. It does present certain ethical difficulties. Like what? Well, imagine his reaction when he finds out his main competitor prepared the will. He might try to challenge the document on conflict of interest grounds. I thought of that. To be honest, I was kind of okay with the prospect of Brian finding out about Clark's role in the case. Let him realize that his father isn't the helpless old man he seems. It doesn't bother me, I said. You have an impeccable reputation, and the paperwork will be done right. What can he argue? Technically, nothing. But morally, it will be hard for him to accept the fact that you came to me. All the better. Maybe it'll make him think about his behavior. Clark nodded and started making notes in his notebook. Good. Then let's get to work. I'll need a few days to study all the documents in detail and prepare a new will. I'll also contact the senior center to clarify the procedure for transferring the funds. How much will it cost? $2,000 for drafting the will and related documents, and another $3,000 for handling the case until it's finalized. That's $5,000. It was a lot of money, but I was willing to pay anything for the opportunity to teach Brian a lesson. Besides, considering the size of my fortune, it was a drop in the bucket. I agree, I said. Then let's go over the details. We spent the next hour going over the finer points of the will. Clark explained all the legal nuances, warned me of possible complications, and clarified my wishes regarding the disposition of various types of property. His professionalism was impeccable. Every point was discussed in detail. Every wording was carefully weighed. There is one important point, Clark said toward the end of our meeting. What if your son changes? What if he realizes his mistakes and tries to mend his ways, I wondered. Frankly, I didn't believe Brian was capable of change. He was too far gone in the world of wealth and prestige, too comfortable in the role of a successful son-in-law of powerful people. Can the will be changed at any time? I asked. Of course. As long as you are alive and in your right mind, you can make any adjustments. Then we'll leave that option open. But I doubt it will be needed. I see. Then I'll get to work. I'll call you in 3 days to update you on the progress of the case. As I left Clark's office, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I was taking active action, not just suffering in silence at my son's indifference. Of course, these actions were drastic, but I saw no other way out. The cars below seemed toy-like. The people seemed like ants hurrying about their business. Somewhere in this city, Brian was working in his office, taking clients, making career plans. He had no idea that today his father had made a decision that would drastically change his future. As I rode the bus back home, I thought about what I would say to Brian when he once again stopped by to check up on me. Would I hint at the changes that had occurred, or would I keep it a secret until the very end? Probably best not to say anything. Let him continue to think of me as a poor old man who should be grateful for any attention. At home, I put the original documents in a safe place and put the copies in a separate folder. Clark was right. Technically, Brian wouldn't be able to contest the will. All the documents would be drawn up according to the law, signed in the presence of witnesses, notarized. His only argument would be bewilderment. How could a father do such a cruel thing to his loving son? But is he a loving son? A man who gives his father a $10 ticket and strangers' villas and jewelry? Who sees his parent once a month and then out of a sense of duty? Who openly says he will come even less often because he has found more interesting company? No, Brian was not a loving son. He had become a stranger, related to me only by formal kinship. And if he perceived our relationship as a formality, then let him get a formal result, a complete lack of inheritance from a father he didn't appreciate. In the evening, Doris called me, asking how I was doing, if I needed any help. I thanked her for her concern, but declined help. I didn't need help now, I needed justice, and I was doing everything I could to get it. A week after my visit to Clark's lawyer, I received a call from him saying that all the documents were ready and waiting for my signature. We arranged to meet the next day. That same evening, as if by some mystical coincidence, Brian and Catherine came to see me. Such joint visits were rare. Usually the daughter-in-law found reasons to stay home. They arrived in a new car, a shiny black SUV that cost probably more than my annual income. Catherine was dressed in an elegant winter coat and high-heeled boots, clearly not designed for walking on the snow-covered sidewalks of my neighborhood. Brian helped her out of the car, holding her hand as she stepped gingerly down the path I'd cleared. "Hi, Daddy," Brian said as we entered the house. "We were just on our way back from the restaurant and thought we'd stop by. I hope we're not interrupting anything." "Of course not," I said, even though it was quite late, about 9 o'clock at night. "Come in and undress." Catherine entered the living room, looking around the room with that special look that designers use to evaluate the object of their work. She had been in this house many times before, but each time she studied it with a new scrutiny, as if she were planning something. "How are you, Mr. Griffin?" she asked, sitting down on the edge of the couch as carefully as if she were afraid of getting her expensive coat dirty. "Not too much trouble this winter, I hope." "I'm managing," I replied. "Would you like tea? Coffee?" "Thanks, we've just come from the restaurant," Brian said. "There was a business meeting with potential investors for the Miami office. It's going very well." He said it with the pride of a man who sees his dreams become a reality. The project of expanding the business to Florida was clearly occupying all of his thoughts. "Philip introduced us to some very interesting people," Catherine added. "Macho, representatives of large corporations who need legal support for their projects in the region. The prospects are fantastic." I nodded, watching them both glow with anticipation of future successes. Their world consisted of opportunities, connections, promising projects. There was no room in that world for talking about the weather or reminiscing about the past. Just plans, calculations, strategies. "You know, Dad," Brian said, settling back in his chair, "while we're on the subject of plans, there's an idea I'd like to discuss with you." Something in his tone made me wary. Brian usually avoided serious conversation during his short visits, preferring to limit himself to generalities about health and the weather. "Yes," I said. "The thing is that Catherine and I have been thinking a lot about your future. You live here alone, the house is big. Taking care of it requires a lot of effort. At your age, it could be dangerous." Catherine nodded, supporting her husband. "We're worried about you, Mr. Griffin. What if something serious happens? Fall, break a leg, or have a heart attack? The neighbors might not notice right away, and time is critical in these situations." Their concern sounded genuine, but I sensed there was something else behind the words. "Sinam, what do you suggest?" I asked. "We found a great nursing home," Brian said. "Sunrise Gardens, a very respectable facility. There's 24-hour medical staff, organized meals, various recreational programs. You'll be among people your own age. You won't be alone. And most importantly," Catherine added, "it's safe. If something happens, help will be close by." I listened to their proposal, realizing what they were getting at. A nursing home. They want to get rid of me permanently, move me to a place where I'll be looked after, and they can manage the house as they see fit. Is it expensive? I asked. Don't worry about it, Brian said hastily. We're willing to bear the cost. After all, you've taken care of our family all your life. Now it's our turn to take care of you. Our family. That's an interesting way of putting it. So now he considers himself and Catherine family, and I'm the object of their care, but not family. What's going to happen to the house? I asked in an innocent tone. Brian and Catherine looked at each other. Apparently they were expecting this question and had already discussed the answer. Well, the house will stay in the family, of course, Brian said. It's just too big for you alone right now. And we could renovate it, clean it up, make some repairs, maybe rent it out to cover the cost of the nursing home. Or sell it, Catherine added. Real estate in this neighborhood is going up in value. You could make good money and invest it more profitably. Sell. That's the whole truth. They want to put me in a nursing home and sell my property and spend the money on their own needs. They've probably already consulted with realtors, estimated the market value of the property, planned how to use the proceeds. I see, I said. Have you looked at this nursing home yet? Of course, Catherine was excited. We went there last week, met with the administration, looked at the premises. It's a very nice place. Modern equipment, qualified staff. There's a library, a gym, even a small garden, Brian added. You'll be able to do what you love to do. Grow flowers. On a smaller scale, but still. A small garden. Instead of my plot, which I'd tended for decades where every tree had been planted with my hands, they were offering me a bed the size of a desk. Sounds like fun, I said. When are you planning this move? Don't rush into a decision, Brian said. Think about it. Weigh the pros and cons. But we think the sooner the better. Winter is not the best time to live alone in a big house. Catherine nodded. Besides, if you move in the next few months, we'll have time to get the house ready for sale before the spring season. Real estate sells best in the spring, so they've done the math. Move me in the winter, put the house on the market in the spring, get the money in the summer and spend it on business expansion or another expensive trip. And what if I don't want to move? I asked. Brian frowned. Dad, be reasonable. You see the house is falling apart. The roof leaks, the heating is acting up, the wiring is old. How much longer can you keep this up? What if there's a fire or a burst pipe? We just want you to be safe, Catherine said softly, and so that you don't have to worry about everyday problems. In a nursing home, all those things are taken care of automatically. They said the right words, expressed the right feelings. Any outsider would say that I have wonderful children who take such touching care of their elderly father. But I saw what was behind the words, a desire to get rid of a burden and get my hands on valuable real estate. I need time to think about it, I said. Sure, Brian agreed. Take your time. But remember, we're always here to help. If you decide to move, we'll organize everything. We'll find the best movers, help you with the paperwork. And with the sale of the house, too, added Catherine. We have a realtor we know, very experienced. He'll appraise the property fairly, find suitable buyers. Fair. I wonder what they mean by fair. Sell my house for market value and put the money in their pockets while I live out my life among strangers? They spent about an hour talking about the advantages of living in a nursing home, how beautifully everything is organized there, how many interesting people I will meet there. Catherine even showed me pictures on her phone. Well-maintained corridors, bright rooms, smiling old people playing cards. Look how beautiful everything is, she said. And this is the dining room, where they serve 3 meals a day. Professional chefs, balanced menu. You don't have to cook for yourself. And this is the study room, Brian added. There are lectures, movies, and clubs. You won't be bored. They described the charms of the nursing home as enthusiastically as if they were advertising a luxury resort. But I saw the truth behind those beautiful pictures. A place where old people live out their days surrounded by strangers, away from everything they cared about. When they finally left, I sat back in my chair and thought about what I had heard. So this is how Brian sees my future. A nursing home for my father and a house and money for myself. It's a very convenient scheme, and it's a very noble one too. Caring kids put the old man in a nice place where he'll be comfortable and safe. But there was one problem with their plan. The house didn't belong to Brian, it belonged to me. And tomorrow I would sign papers that would permanently remove him from my property. Let them make plans, consult with realtors, pick out nursing homes. They'll soon learn that not everything in this life can be calculated in advance, and that sometimes parents give their children surprises they don't even realize they have. Tomorrow I'll sign the papers that will show Brian the true cost of his care for me. We'll see how he plans for my future when he finds out that future no longer belongs to me. It was exactly 2 weeks after I signed the new will at Harrison Clark's office. The documents had been notarized, all the formalities had been fulfilled. Now I could sleep easy, knowing that my estate would go into the hands of those who really needed help, not to a son who thought a $10 movie ticket was a worthy gift for his father. Wednesday morning, I got a call from Clark. "Mr. Griffin, I have a suggestion," he said. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I've come to the conclusion that your son should find out about the changes in the will in advance." "Why?" I wondered. "We agreed to keep it a secret." "You see, there are ethical considerations. If Brian finds out about the disinheritance only after your death, it could be a real shock to him. Plus, he'll feel like he's been cheated. Maybe we should give him a chance to rethink his relationship with you." I was quiet for a moment, thinking about the lawyer's suggestion. Frankly, I was curious about Brian's reaction. I wanted to see his face when he realized that all his plans for my house and savings had fallen apart overnight. "How do you propose we do this?" "Officially, I'll go to his office as your representative and give him a copy of the will. It would be completely legal and professionally correct." I like the idea. Let Brian hear about the change from his main competitor in front of his coworkers. It would spice up the situation. "Okay," I agreed. "When do you plan to do it?" "Tomorrow, Friday. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the office will be crowded. I think that would be a good time to have this conversation." "And that's fine. Just let me know when it's over. I'm interested in his reaction." "I will." I spent the next day in a strange state of suspense. I did the usual things, reading the paper, watching TV, cooking dinner, but my thoughts kept returning to Clark's upcoming meeting with Brian. I imagined my son sitting in his leather chair, reviewing documents on the next case, and suddenly the secretary said that Harrison Clark asked to see him. The Griffin and Associates office was located in a prestigious business center on Main Street, occupying the entire 9th floor of a modern building. Brian was proud of the office, often talking about the impression it made on his clients. Panoramic windows overlooking the river, expensive furniture, paintings by modern artists on the walls. Everything was designed to demonstrate the success and prosperity of the firm. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang. "Mr. Griffin, this is Harrison Clark." The meeting was held. "How'd it go?" It was, dramatic. Your son was surprised, to say the least. At first, he thought I was here on a business matter. When he realized what it was, he reacted very violently. "Tell me more about it." "I arrived at his office at exactly 3 o'clock, Clark began. "The receptionist said Brian was busy with a client, but I told her it was urgent and a family matter." She relayed my words to him, and a few minutes later, the client left and I was invited into the office. I visualized the scene. Brian must have been puzzled by the visit from a competitor, perhaps thinking that Clark had come to poach some client or to suggest joining forces on a big case. "Brian greeted me politely but warily," the lawyer continued. "He offered me coffee and asked me what I was after. I told him I was representing his father in probate matters." "What was his reaction?" "Surprise. He asked why you needed a lawyer and why you didn't go to one yourself. I explained that there was a conflict of interest. And then I took out a copy of the will and put it on his desk. I told him that I was acting on your instructions and that I had to formally notify him of any changes in the probate documents." Clark fell silent, apparently remembering the details of the conversation. He read it calmly at first. The lawyer continued. "Sakin." But when he got to the disinheritance clause, his face changed. He reread the paragraph several times, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. What did he say? Nothing at first. He just sat silently looking at the document. Then he asked me if it was true, if it was a joke. I confirmed that the will was drawn up in accordance with the law and reflected your father's will. I could imagine Brian's state of mind at that moment. All his life he had taken it for granted that he would inherit his father's estate. A small inheritance, he thought, but an inheritance nonetheless. And now it turned out he would inherit nothing. And when he saw the full list of property, I asked. That was the best part, Clark grinned. He was reading the list of properties, stocks, bank accounts, and his face was getting paler and paler. At one point, he even got up from the table, went to the window and stood there for a few minutes. Probably didn't expect his old dad to have so much money. Exactly. When he turned to me, he asked me how you got such a fortune, whether you were hiding income from the tax authorities, whether it was all connected to some legal activity. It was typical of Brian to think about possible legal problems first, not about why his father was hiding the truth about his financial situation from him, but about whether he was breaking the law in doing so. What did you tell him? The truth, that you inherited the property from your late wife, that all the documents were in order, that the taxes were paid on time. I showed him the IRS records you gave me. Shana. And how did he take it? He sat back down at the table, read the will again. Then he asked if he could contest it. I explained that the document had been drawn up perfectly, all the formalities had been observed, and there was no reason to challenge it. Clark was silent for a moment, apparently remembering the highlights of the conversation. And then he got angry, the lawyer continued. Summer, he said it wasn't fair, that he'd been a good son all his life, that he'd taken care of you. Asked what he'd done to deserve that kind of treatment. Interesting. What did you say? I said I don't discuss my client's motives. I only do their bidding. But I added that if he had any questions about his father, he should come to you directly. That's correct. Then he asked if he could meet with you in my presence to discuss the situation. I said it was up to your discretion. A meeting in the presence of an attorney. Brian is apparently hesitant to come to me alone, afraid of a violent scene, or he's counting on the presence of a third party to make me behave more restrained. And at the very end, Clark lowered his voice as if he was about to share a particularly important piece of information. He asked if you had any mental health issues, if you were suffering from senile dementia, if you were under someone else's influence. It was already an insult. Brian was ready to declare his father crazy just to get his inheritance back. I hope you disappointed him. Of course I did. I told him I'd been watching you for weeks and could attest to your full competence. Plus, we have a note from your doctor confirming that you're not mentally ill. I asked Dr. Wilson for that certificate when I was drafting the will. I anticipated that Brian might try to challenge my capacity. How did the conversation end? He said he'd come to see you tonight to explain. He said to tell you he was looking forward to discussing things and finding a compromise. Compromise. Brian still believed that we could work things out, fix things, get things back on track. He didn't realize that my decision was final. Thanks for the detailed story, I said. And how did the employees of his firm react? Well, the conversation took place in the office with the doors closed, but when I left, I saw that the secretary and several junior lawyers were looking in our direction with curiosity. I guess the news would spread quickly around the office. It was an additional blow to Brian's ego. Not only had he lost his inheritance, but his co-workers would find out about the family scandal. In their circles, such things quickly became the subject of gossip. Shauna, well, it's done, I said. Thanks again for your work. Mr. Griffin, I have one piece of advice. Your son is in a state of shock today. He may say some things, do some things he'll regret. Try to stay calm during this conversation. I will. After talking to the lawyer, I sat in the chair and waited. Brian would arrive tonight. It was inevitable. But no longer as an indulgent son visiting his elderly father, but as a man trying to save what he thought was rightfully his. It was interesting to see how quickly things had changed. Just yesterday, he was planning to sell my house and put me in a nursing home. Today, he found out he wouldn't get a dime of my inheritance. Brian arrived at 7:30 in the evening. I heard the sound of his car before I even saw the headlights in the window. The engine was running rough. My son must have been in a hurry and was speeding up. Usually he parked neatly, parallel to the curb, but today the car was parked at an angle, as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. Brian got out of the car and walked toward the house with a quick, determined stride. The tension of a man preparing for an important conversation was evident in his movements. He was dressed in the same expensive suit he had worn that morning, but his tie was loosened and his hair was slightly disheveled. Apparently, he hadn't cared much for his appearance after his meeting with Clark. He didn't knock, but used the spare keys I'd given him years ago. He came in like a master, but when he saw me in the chair, he stopped in the living room doorway, as if hesitant to take another step. "Hi, Daddy," he said quietly. We need to talk." "Come in, sit down," I said, not getting up. "Do you want tea?" "No, thanks." Brian sat on the edge of the couch, leaning forward, his hands folded in front of him. The posture was like that of a petitioner ready for a difficult conversation. I could see that he had carefully thought out the conversation, perhaps even rehearsed some of the phrases on the way here. "Harrison Clark came to my office today," he began cautiously. "Showed me the documents you signed. Is it true?" "It's true," I answered calmly. "Dad, I don't understand. What did I do? Why did you make this decision?" I could hear the confusion and pain in his voice. Apparently, for the past hours, he tried to analyze our relationship, to find the reason for my actions, but could not come to a definite conclusion. "What do you think?" I asked. "I don't know," he flared up. I've always been a good son, visiting you, wondering what you were up to, taking care of your health. Yes, maybe we didn't see each other as often as we would have liked, but I have a job, a family, obligations." "A movie ticket," I said quietly. "What?" "Your Christmas present, a $10 movie theater ticket." Brian frowned, apparently not understanding the connection between the gift and disinheritance. "So what? I told you it wasn't about the money. I thought it might be nice for you to go to a movie, unwind a little. And you gave Philip Blackwell a Rolex watch. Judith got a diamond necklace, and your father-in-law bought them all a $2 million villa." Now Brian began to see where I was going with this. His face reflected the realization that the contrast between the gifts looked really insulting. "So concerned, Dad, these are very different situations," he began to justify himself. "Philip and Judith are powerful people, and they're helping me in my career. It's a business relationship that requires a proper investment. And I'm what? A burden that needs a handout? No, of course not. You're my father, I love you. It's just that we don't need expensive gifts to express our feelings. We're family." "Family," I repeated bitterly. "Then why do you spend Christmas with strangers and not with your family?" "Catherine wanted to be with her parents." "Couldn't you have insisted on spending at least one day with your father? Or invite me to come with you?" Brian stopped talking. We both knew the latter option was impossible. I wouldn't fit in with the Blackwells, and I'd be a source of embarrassment to everyone here. "Dad, let's be honest," he said finally. "You know it would be awkward. They have different lifestyles, different interests. You'd feel out of place." "So you're embarrassed of me," I said. "I'm not shy. It's just, we just live in different worlds. It doesn't mean that I don't love you or appreciate you, but the fact remains that we don't have much in common." He finally told the truth. We did live in different worlds, and he chose Blackwell's world a long time ago. "And that's why you decided to send me to a nursing home," I said. Brian flinched, apparently not expecting me to jump to the subject so quickly. "It's not what you think. We're really worried about your safety. The house is old, you live alone. It could be dangerous at your age. And selling the house is also a safety concern?" "Well, we thought the money from the sale could be a good investment. Real estate isn't the safest investment right now, but stocks or bonds?" "Whose stocks? What bonds?" Brian realized he'd blurted it out. The look on his face became guilty. "Dad, we didn't mean to lie to you. We were just thinking of the best way to use the money for your own good." "My funds for my benefit, but without my involvement," I summarized. "You don't know anything about finance. I have experience, connections, opportunities to make a good profit." That was the last straw. He saw me not only as a burden, but as an incapacitated old man who couldn't manage his own money. "Brian," I said firmly, "did you find out today how much money I have?" "Yes, and I don't understand why you kept it from me. We could have managed that capital together, made a big profit." "We or you?" "Well, mostly me, of course. You have no experience with large sums of money." He still doesn't get it. Even now, when he spoke of love and family ties, his words were all about practical considerations, money, investment, profit, not a word about how much it hurt him to lose his father. that he was willing to change to preserve the relationship. Now tell me honestly, I continued, if it weren't for the money, would you be sitting here right now? If I was a really poor old man with one pension, would you be so worried about the will? Brian was silent for a long time, apparently struggling with himself. Did he want to lie again, or did he want to be honest? Maybe not as much, he finally admitted. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. That's exactly what it means. You love my money, not me. That's not fair. I cared about you when I thought you had nothing, worried if your pension was enough, if you needed help. Did you? When was the last time you asked me how I spend my days? What I'm thinking? What I'm reading? Who I'm hanging out with? When did you ask about my health in a real, not formal way? Brian was silent again. We both knew the answers to those questions. Dad, he said more quietly, let's start over. I realize I've been an inattentive son, but it can be fixed. I'll come more often, we'll talk more. Revoke the will. Give me a chance to be a better man. And the Blackwells? Plans for Miami? New business connections? It can all be combined. Work and family shouldn't be mutually exclusive. But up until now, they have. I'll change. I promise. I looked at my son and saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. Fear. He was afraid of losing the money he thought was rightfully his, afraid that his plans would fall apart, that he'd have to explain to Catherine and the Blackwells why he'd been disinherited, afraid of looking like a failure in the eyes of the people he valued. It's too late, I said calmly. Why too late? As long as you're alive, the will can be changed. Clark told me so himself. Because the only reason you want to change it is because of money. If it weren't for the inheritance, you'd still visit me once a month and think that's enough filial affection. That's not true, it is. And we both know it. Brian got up from the couch and started pacing the room like a lawyer thinking about defense strategy in a complex case. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say I've been a bad son. But is that a reason to disinherit me completely? Maybe cut back, give some of the money to charity, but leave something for me? No. Why? Because you take inheritance for granted. You think parents are obliged to leave their children their property no matter how they behave. But it's not. An inheritance is a gift, and gifts are given to those who are loved and deserve it. Is a charitable organization more deserving than your own son? Yes, because they help people who've been abandoned by their children. People like me. Brian stopped in front of the window, staring out into the darkness of the winter evening. His shoulders slumped and his posture became doomed. Apparently, he had finally realized that all his arguments were useless. So this is final? He asked without turning around. Yes. And there's nothing you can do about it? Nothing. He turned to me, and I saw in his eyes not the pain of loss, but cold anger. You know what, Dad? Maybe you're right. Maybe I really was a bad son. But you weren't a perfect father either. You never understood my ambition, never supported my drive to succeed, always looked at my life with some kind of envy or judgment. I was proud of your accomplishments. No, you were proud that I rose above you. But when I actually became successful, living a better life than you could have imagined, you began to judge me. For what? Because I have money? Because my wife comes from a good family? Because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in this house? There was some truth in what he said, and that was what hurt the most. Maybe I was jealous of his success. Maybe I was annoyed that he'd gotten what I could only dream of so easily. Maybe you're right, I said, but that doesn't change anything. Of course it doesn't, because you've decided to punish me for being more successful than you, for growing out of this world and not wanting to go back into it. Brian put on his coat and headed for the door. It's your choice, Dad, but know this. When you need help, when you get sick or grow old, don't count on me. You're the one who broke our bond. He left the house, slamming the door. A minute later, I heard the sound of the engine starting and saw the red lights of his car disappear into the darkness. I was alone in an empty house, but for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Things were finally falling into place. Brian and I were no longer playing happy family, no longer pretending to have a warm relationship. Everything was honest now. He was living his life, and I was living mine. Tomorrow I'll call Clark and tell him that the will stands. My money will go to those who really need it, not to a spoiled son who thinks his father's a burden. Justice has finally been served.